Welcome back to Beyond the Wrench. My name is Jay Goninen, and I am your host. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Ryan Kooiman. Ryan has spent his career supporting technician development and helping shops improve through training, education, and industry collaboration. We're going to talk through his journey, the work he's involved in today, and the trends he's seeing across the industry, especially when it comes to technician career paths and how they continue to evolve. Ryan brings a great perspective on what's happening in the bays and how both techs and shop leaders can continue to grow. Ryan, thanks for being on the show. How are you?
Fantastic. Thanks for having me, Jay. I think between both of our last names, there's a contest in there to see who can pronounce them a little or
It's a lot of
properly,
vowels. A lot of vowels in both. Yeah. I always tell people if I'm on their podcast or if they're introducing me to speak somewhere, like, don't worry about my last name. Just say Jay from WrenchWay, and then we'll get there. But
Likewise.
Great to see you. We are coming off maybe, I think, 2 out of 3 weeks. We were able to see each other in person, and had a chance to walk the SEMA show with you. That was pretty cool, wasn't it?
That was awesome. I mean, I was just out there wandering, and for the audience, Jay and I are both lovers of the 60s era C10 trucks, and I'm walking through SEMA looking, and all of a sudden I find one. I'm like taking some pictures, and lo and behold, here's Jay on the other side of the truck taking pictures too. So it was a great afternoon. Got to wander and catch up, and share some stories about our own vehicles there too. So it's fantastic.
It's such a cool show in that it brings, we spent a lot of time on the Apex side, right? But being able to take some time, it was my last afternoon down there, and I think it was yours as well. You kind of carve out maybe a couple hours to run through the show and see the cool stuff. And man, they're just seeing. We were watching those dirt bikes. For Nitro Circus, going up in the air, just some crazy stuff. But for a couple of car guys down there, it doesn't get much better than that.
No, it doesn't. And to your point, I've been staying on my feet all week. Been out there for 5 days already, close to 20,000 steps a day, and I continually remind myself, like, the me of 20 years ago would be a kid in a candy store on this stuff, and quite frankly, I still am. And we're blessed. A lot of our technician friends want to go to SEMA someday, and we're there, right? And we use terms like "I have to go again." So I remind myself of this is pretty cool, and it's fun to just go wander and see all the new stuff out there.
I couldn't agree more. Well, let's talk about Ryan from 20 years ago. How did what got you into the industry? I'd love the origin story. I love talking about this. How did you get into this?
Well, much like yourself, my father is to blame for a lot of this. My dad was a heavy equipment mechanic and covered northern Michigan. I live in West Michigan here, but he would hop in the service truck usually on Mondays and drive up to the stone quarries and work on Terex and Grove brand equipment, and then come home on Thursdays or something. And then, before I was a teenager, then he was working more locally. But so I grew up working with him. Detroit Diesels, Caterpillars, Cummins were a big part of my life growing up. And then so it was only kind of natural when I was in high school. One of my first jobs was doing lawn care in the summer, but in the wintertime, I worked at a shop. And then eventually I enjoyed the shop more and saw more of a future there. I went to community college for a while to get into engineering. And, they have some math programs there, and it quickly separates the men from the boys and gets people like me out of their program. So I ended up back in the shop, and I enjoyed it and made a great life or a living for my family and I. And then spent 16 years in the aftermarket shops. And then it was the Vision Conference out in Kansas City. I believe it was 2002, 2003 timeframe. I met Jeff Masterman, manager of development for Standard Motor Products Pro Training Programs. He was sitting in the back of a class, and Jim Linder was teaching it, and Jim and I have been friends for a while. And I was asking some comments, etc. And Jeff caught me afterwards and he's like, man, you asked a lot of really intelligent questions. Like, I don't know what that means, but I'm curious. And so I started working with Standard on a contract basis, doing some content development, a lot of case studies. All of the training classes with Standard include approximately 10 case studies, which are not created in the lab. They're true stories from the technicians. And so I started doing that, started writing some classes. Then 2010, I started working full time for Standard as a content developer. And I guess I'll call those the good old days. You know, I had 6 months to research and write a class. I still have the keys to 8 different shops here in West Michigan, so I'm friends with a lot of shop owners and a lot of access to stuff. We joke, you know, I'm kind of the Bigfoot or Sasquatch in the area, not just because I'm big and hairy, but there's evidence I've been there, but nobody's ever seen me. You know, I'll snoop around these friend shops at night and go, oh, that's cool. We were looking for one of these, you know, and get some data or whatever. So uh, I guess I wasn't a good developer because they moved me to management very shortly, and you know, find myself here today, 15 years later, overseeing the pro training team, where we reach about 70,000 technicians a year, and
Wow.
then we have in-house training, 360 photo studio for our catalog content team, tech line services, and then engineering test facilities. So that's one of the programs I'm probably more proud of today is as an aftermarket manufacturer, when we get done developing something in a lab, we install it on a vehicle. And then we have to put between 1,000 and 3,000 miles on it to verify it. And something I don't think a lot of our competitors do today, but it's interesting how things have come full circle. I wanted to be an engineer, and I've got a team of engineers working under me here. So
Isn't that crazy?
anything's possible, right?
Yeah. Well, I want to go back to your mindset early on, because you not only were a technician, you were a pretty decorated technician, right? You had the credentials, you had some pretty big awards.
Yeah.
We should talk about. And I think where I always get interested, especially with somebody that was so good technically, is how did you get there? I mean, you talked about the curiosity, and you're asking questions in that class and asking some questions that probably showed that you were thinking about this at a little deeper level. I'm just,
Yep.
has that been something that was ingrained in you from an early age, or did this develop over time?
Probably developed a little bit over time. I remember a couple clear defining moments. And so in high school, you know, I was probably living paycheck to paycheck and, you know, make some money and buy a new snowmobile or a newer truck and, you know, having the toys. But a friend of mine now who's passed away, Jeremy Muhlenberg, uh, owned a pretty large painting and interior decorating company. But back in high school, all of a sudden, he's building a new house and or right out of high school, and you know, getting married and supporting a family right away. I'm like, Jer, where'd this? He's like, well, you know, I've been saving and you know working hard for this stuff. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I should probably get on that program. And so
That seems more fun.
yeah, yeah, Dave Ramsey would be proud of Jer in my mindset at that point. But so that was one thing. But then I quickly adopted the mentality of there's nobody behind me, right? The car stops here. And so it's unacceptable in my mindset to go, I don't know. And that's probably a pride thing, an ego thing. You know, drivability technicians are always accused of being the prima donna in the shop. But I just had that mindset of like, this car, we can't kick it to the dealer and hope that they fix it or send it to another shop. And so that created kind of a hunger to start looking for stuff. Um, you know, I think back to the late 90s when I was working in the shop, we had a cast machine. You know, they were talking about IM 240 coming to Michigan, and we bought this thing, and it was doing stuff I didn't really appreciate till 10 years later, like relative cranking compression and, you know, KV snap throttle and sniffing the tailpipe and just a lot of tests there. So that got me intrigued in training and classes. And then, so I'd go to any class I could get my hands on. I don't care if it was about how to install an oil filter or something. There's probably something to be learned out of this that would make me more proficient in my job and make a better paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
So I started going to all these different classes, and then I ran into a gentleman, John Thornton. I don't want to be the name dropper here, but he'd come to Grand Rapids area several times a year, and so I started going to his classes and networking both through John, but also hanging out with the guys after class and talking. And we'd share some stories. We didn't view each other as competitors. We viewed each other as brothers in the same fight. And then my area, you and I are on opposite sides of Lake Michigan here, but you know, factory scan tools, and Jay Jay Myring was my Vitronics sales rep, and he was phenomenal, and he was highly decorated himself, and so he started the Master Tech Club, and everybody that bought the old Vitronics Master Tech, you'd meet once a month and have these discussions, and finally he started propping me up in front of the group. So that's really where I got my first attempt at training, is working with these guys. And in the audience there, many of them are still good friends today, and share a lot of great discussions. But Thornton then turned me on to Linder Tech, and then Vision. And so I went there and met guys, Matt Fonslow, Paul Suter, Mike Miller, uh, you know, just a lot of guys I've become friends with. Harvey Chan. Then we had a Skype group, and so we always challenge each other with stuff, and just by networking, continued to scratch that itch, I guess. And these guys had a lot of the same questions, and we just fed off each other with that. And probably one more influence was a gentleman by the name Pat O'Neill, owned O'Neill's Transmissions. Good friends with his grandsons, Sean and Craig O'Neill, today yet. But Pat sought me out as a young technician and said, you're different, and I've assembled a group of guys. I'm going to take them to the SA World Congress in Detroit in a couple weeks. Would you like to go with us? And
Dang.
that was just out of my wheelhouse, but that shifted me maybe into a little more of a professional atmosphere, and straighten up, and just exposed me to a whole different world of stuff there. So
Well, I think what you just said there, and you're walking through all of these really kind of, I'd consider industry titans, right? Of really this aftermarket world, and I think there's that curiosity and that want to get better in the best. I have a book behind me called Growth Mindset, and I always think about that, and how you're always pushing yourself. And at times technicians might shy away from going to a conference or doing something that might be out of their comfort zone, but it just opens the world to so many opportunities. And you look at Fonslow now, just
Right.
with his progression and having a podcast and doing all of these things on top of being one of the best techs in the country. There's so much opportunity out there if you've got a mindset that you're willing to make yourself a little bit uncomfortable. You are maybe going to put yourself in situations where you're amongst the best, right? I think a lot of times, if say you're that best technician in your shop, you could get bored, right? Or
Right.
maybe
Right.
you're frustrated with those around you that aren't operating at that higher level. And seeking out opportunities like you did, I think, is so game changing for a great technician, that when you put yourself in an environment where you're surrounded by others that are at the top of their game, just like athletics, right? Like if you're an athlete and you can put yourself amongst the best, and really just, I don't know, it's this different mentality. It's a different mindset. I think, it's so easy for us in the industry, for technicians, especially young technicians, to go out and look at a Facebook group and see all the negative that's out there. But like when you kind of choose to put yourself in a situation where you're surrounding yourself with great people, it can't do anything but help, right?
Correct. Yeah. I mean, even today, I like to make sure I'm not the smartest guy in the room. That's pretty easy on some days here. Yeah, but there's always something to learn from somebody, right? And today, already this morning, I had a meeting with a dozen guys, and I took away a lot from just the discussions there. And then I had a breakfast meeting with a friend who owns multiple turkey farms, and I've learned a lot here today, and even in our preamble discussions, and so everybody's got something to offer, and that's one thing I've learned as a leader, and just as a human being. Everybody's got a story. Everybody's got something that you can take away from that conversation. So being an active listener and sometimes seeking out those conversations. You brought up a fantastic point and something I talk about with my children. I've done graduation speeches at schools and other presentation coaching stuff at schools. Being comfortable with an uncomfortable situation will serve you well throughout the rest of your life. Getting up and standing in front of an audience, or I've been involved in negotiations at this point, and court proceedings, different stuff. The more you can remain calm and comfortable in those situations, the better off you're going to be. Your mind is still strategically playing the chess game here. And then that goes into auto repair, thinking ahead through the process, not just going one bolt at a time, but working your way through the system. That car comes in, there's a lot of struggle. My mindset still today is there's a front bumper and a back bumper. The problem's right here. It's not somewhere else in the universe. It's right here, right in front of me. I just got to track it down and, methodically work through things.
How do you balance that? And I'll transition a little bit to technicians as a whole. I hear this maybe more on the dealer side, but you hear some of it on the aftermarket side as well, like balancing the curiosity and wanting to fix complex things with something like flat rate, or
Right.
like with something where there's so much more pressure, it feels like now, on a technician to be profitable and understanding, hey, if I want to get paid more, I need to produce more. And there's this weird balance where I think, I'll mention Josh Arnold, who is a really good friend of the podcast, recently just actually hosted the podcast and interviewed me, which was very awkward to be on the other side.
Fun to flip the script. Yep.
Yeah, but he had talked about how he embraced flat rate when he was a young tech, and he had a different perspective on it. And he said, I had a good understanding with my boss, and the dealership he was at was open hours that were over and above his hours that he worked there. And so if he was doing an engine job, he would go to his supervisor and say, hey, listen, this calls for 10 hours. It's going to take me double that. So do you mind if I stay after hours to work on this? And his whole intent was like, I want to learn how to do this the right way, even though it's going to cost me some time right now.
Yeah.
And it was just one of those, a similar mindset to you, right? Where it was just like so mind blowing to me that somebody would have that mindset and really like truly want to learn the craft and learn how to do it. And I'm like, how refreshing is that? It's not just somebody that's, mad because they got $50 less on their paycheck this week. He was truly trying to learn.
Correct. Yeah. And I think that's where a lot of that curiosity or that personal investment maybe is a better way to look at it, of a lot of late nights, a lot of Saturdays, a lot of early mornings early on in my career to just research. I was getting into lab scope, and I wrote probably one of the industry's first engine mechanical classes with electronic testing methods. I'm certainly not the inventor of it, but just learning better stuff with vacuum transducers and in-cylinder pressure stuff, and fine-tuning some of that, and how can we use this? How can it, I go back to some of the discussions with my service writer back at that time. I would do a test and say, okay, it's got a leaking valve. And he's like, well, is it intake or exhaust? Like, it doesn't matter. The cylinder head's coming off one way or the other, right? And
so true.
Keeping some of this stuff in check, because guys today will learn something new. I mean, had case studies where it was an ABS fault. The guy's sending us in-cylinder pressure captures and stuff. I'm like, why'd you do that, right? let's keep it simple with a lot of this stuff too, and keep it in check. But you brought up a fantastic point too about everybody wants to learn all the drivability stuff, or not everybody, but some guys really want to dive in down that path, and that's fantastic. We need those drivability technicians, but at the end of the day, probably the guy pounding ball joints in is making the shop more money because he's selling parts and labor at that point. Whereas I know a lot of time when I was just doing, the tough diagnosis or something like that, I'm selling labor. Now, obviously today there's multiple labor rates, and the shop business side of it has evolved significantly, certainly in our careers. And you see the difference of just a one size fits all labor rate, and here's what it is, bring it in. People are way more in tune to numbers today. But again, I think at the end of the day, let's not get too consumed with the numbers, and customer satisfaction and employee satisfaction come in to play. Everybody talks about technician shortage. I would almost argue that there's a good shop shortage more so than technician shortage, right?
Could not agree more. Could not agree more. And I do think some of that is, if we were to take fault or blame as an industry, I think a lot of it comes from maybe us as an industry not preparing shop leaders as far in advance, right? Like my dad was one of those guys that started in the shop and really almost by default ended up as a leader, right? And it took him a long time to kind of come to terms with the fact that you can't have your buddies coming to the shop and doing their own work in your shop, and like you have to, like, it was such an he was a really young guy when he started the shop. But I think you look at this and you're like, okay, where can we as an industry, as we're moving forward, get better? Well, I do think there's some level of leadership style training. I think we're getting more and more of that. I do think podcasts like this or any other podcast, there's so many great podcasts in our industry to listen to. Parnell's great. Carm's great. Like we've got so many great ones out there. And like for those that want to move in that direction, do yourself a favor. Like if you're early on in your career, start consuming that as well, right? Like you were talking about the technical side, and that's super, super important, especially for an early technician. Like get your nose in a book and understand systems. You'll be way better off. Same thing with like, as you're starting to progress in your career, like get to know leadership and show leadership in your shop, be a leader in your shop. And some of that's not rocket science. It's, show up 15 minutes early to work and have your bay ready to go. Like there's so much stuff that you can do at an early age that will help drive that. But I think there's a huge opportunity there. But then I also think we could do a better job at helping technicians understand the business of running a shop and making sure that they understand, I've pointed to this example multiple times, but it's probably the best meeting I've ever been in, which was at a dealership in South Carolina. This guy comes in, writes a number on the board and says, can anybody guess what that number is? And everybody's kind of like, I don't know. It's like, that's the amount of money we have to make per month to break even. And everybody's eyes are like, oh my goodness. And so it's one of those things where transparency, I think, would drive a lot of this communication and would drive a lot of things to go better, and helping techs try to truly understand the business a little bit.
Well, and I'm a huge fan of salary with incentives or hourly with incentives, but
same.
I spent 90% of my career as a flat rate tech, even in shop management and ownership, then moved to the salary portion. But, I appreciated flat rate because I knew what this job paid and what I had to do to be profitable for me and for the business then too. This fuel pump's going to pay 3.5 hours and a half hour to do a fuel filter with it. And okay, well, that means I got to get it done in 2 hours. And, my internal competitiveness took over. But if it's an hourly technician and they have no idea what that job is it a 12-hour job or a 2-hour job? I think that drives their motivation on it a little bit as well. One other thing you kind of touched in, and as I've been invited to do several after dinner discussions about the industry, we all grew up in a time where you walk in the shop, all right, go bust tires and go change oil. Very important services. You can probably screw up a car faster by doing an oil change incorrectly than anything else. But as we talk about today's technicians coming out of school, they have a different skill set than we did, or as our fathers did when they came into the industry. So a lot of kids are very proficient with typing, with computer skills, maybe even better communicators. And so, or worse, but they're familiar with
Depending on the
technology.
type of communication.
Right, right. Snapchat, that's
Yeah.
communication.
They're amazing at that. Yeah.
So, so, as I challenge these shop owners, like, how many of you doing ADAS calibrations? Like, not yet. Or module programming, and no, not yet. Well, if you're not doing it and you don't know anything about it, this kid coming in, that's probably really easy stuff for him. And so maybe you break him in doing some of that type of stuff. It opens up a new market for you, new possibilities. And yeah, it's undeniable you need to know the basics of how stuff works and whatever, but let's not berate people, the shop pranks and pick on the new guy and do all this stuff. We've been doing that for 50 years, and then we stand here wondering, I don't know why nobody wants to stick around and do this.
Nobody wants to hang out with us anymore. Well, no kidding.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well, no kidding. I was having a discussion in Greenville, South Carolina with a well-known industry person, and they were talking about that. I'm like, well, what are the shops around here paying? He's like, 12 to 14 bucks an hour for starting. I'm like, turn around and look. There's a Bass Pro Shops right behind with a big banner starting at 25 bucks an hour plus 20% discount on whatever you want to buy there. No kidding. No wonder why nobody wants to go work over here.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a battle I think I've had with our industry for a long time, is just, and I'm guilty of this at some level, of like, you have to be profitable to be able to pay your people what you need to pay them and offer them the benefits, like just to have good people coming in. And people struggle to get their hands around that. And I think, there's some that struggle, and then there's some that are probably too far the other way, where they're making good profit but not paying their people, and that one's as frustrating, or more frustrating. But you're absolutely right. I think when we talk about shop culture, especially at a young age, like I've talked to several others about this, like we grew up in the industry when wrenches were being thrown across the shop, right? Pretty consistently.
And that was
I don't think we can do that.
For me is a gentleman who I still remember it clearly. We got our new shop coats around this time of year, around Thanksgiving time, new winter coats for the shop. And the ASE logo was printed as red. And the guy's like, you're so stupid. You wouldn't even know what Blue Seal means and all that stuff. And you'll never be, ASE certified. And I'm like, okay. And I still look today. I respect the gentleman. He's a fantastic GM dealer tech today, but whether he knows it or not, he was a motivating factor in my career path too.
Well, and I think my hope would be maybe we take different ways to motivate young techs, right? Like maybe not that, because I think I heard a lot of that same stuff. And it is, when you're young and you're getting your butt kicked by cars and trying to figure things out, and there is some level of, regardless of where you start in the industry, you go through this grind a little bit of like trying to figure this stuff out. And it can be very demotivating for a young tech to come into a shop and then just have maybe that old tech in their ear, just kind of constantly harping on, especially right now, we hear all the time, like some of the older techs saying, like, you shouldn't come into this industry. Don't come in. Like, this is, you're going to end up in bad shape. And I'm like, at some level, that person's going to be miserable regardless of what industry they were in, right? Like and I've worked with some of them, and I know they'd be miserable with whatever industry they were in. They'd complain about whatever it is that they do. And so, I get frustrated at times with our industry internally with some of our cultures, and some of it is, it's in our DNA. That's the way it's been for a long time. And it's going to take a while to get some of that cleaned up. but I do think it's necessary for this next generation of technician that we're going to need. We need a more professional technician. And as you see, we talk about AI all the time, right? And like how AI is taking jobs, and now all of a sudden skilled trades are kind of that sexy thing again, and everybody's looking at it. These cars are getting more complicated by the second, and we need very, very skilled, very talented people to be able to work on these and to be able to train up. But if we had that shop from the 70s or 80s, or like if we have that mentality, it's going to be hard to attract that level of talent that we're going to need in this industry. And that's something that I think we've got to figure out how to change.
Correct. Yeah. And so I've been involved with many schools, much like yourself, obviously. And so it's always interesting to hear the influx of students coming in every year, what skills they possess, what they don't possess. You and I, blessed or cursed, whatever day it is, of growing up with our dads, so we had a good feel for how to do this stuff. My sons are both now entering into the trade. Yours may or may not as well. And so it's been interesting as a parent to look at this and what my boys do. We've got the shop here at home with a hoist and everything, and I think our record so far is 5 vehicles coming and going in 1 week. The two of them, my 15-year-old and 19-year-old sons, have bought and sold any given week and do some stuff to it. So it's been eye-opening for me, and that certainly influenced my thought process as an educator or leading of a training entity, how we approach these people. And it's really helped me understand, like, my now 19-year-old son's worked in a shop full time for 2 years. In his boss is somebody I mentored or have known since the guy was 4 years old. So the first week there, he said, "Here's a 64 GTO. Pull the engine out, reseal every gasket, paint the engine and transmission, put it back together, and then change the gears and rear end. Call me if you need help." And then next was doing an LS swap on a 55 Chevy. And so he jumped right into that. But I've seen him now go from bolt by bolt to thinking 4 steps ahead and how can I be more efficient in this. And so he's become really a very proficient R&R guy. And now we're kind of making the transition into systems, as you mentioned earlier, and understanding how it all kind of comes together. When you turn the ignition switch or you push the button on the dash, all these things have to happen in a certain sequence to get the starter to engage and understand that and do diagnostics. He bought his own scan tool a couple months ago, and, pulling codes and going through that part, but getting him disciplined to look up the trouble code, what are the set criteria, and spend more time behind the screen doing the research and less time poking and hoping under the dash or underneath the hood. So
that is where that off hours training comes in so handy too, right? Like if I think the best techs I've ever met are the ones that, they'll go home and read about something, or, maybe watch Scanner Danner or watch some of this other content that's out there that is informative and accessible, right? And I think the more they view it as like, this is my craft, I'm going to get really good at this, and then you understand those systems. That is one of the things where I often say that if I could go back and tell my young self something, it would be, when they're trying to teach you theory in schools, they're not doing it for the fun of it. Like you should listen. And I don't think I listened very good. I think I was automatically like, oh, I want to be a diag tech. And you're like, no, you have to really understand how systems work first. And, if you're not fully aware of how a sensor operates or works, or if you're not fully aware of the communication that happens in a vehicle, and just, how often do you see, and I this would be a good one for you just in general. like just something as simple as a voltage drop test, like
Right.
that can be very hard for somebody to wrap their
Right.
head around. And it's pretty essential for a lot of the stuff you're going to do in your career. How much do technicians really make? At WrenchWay, we work with some of the best shops and dealerships across the country, and we've discovered that technicians often earn more than what some online sources suggest. For example, the Bureau of Labor Statistics reports that technicians make an average of $47,000 per year, but we know that's not reflective of the true earning potential of technicians. We've teamed up with ASE to create an online technician pay tool, a free, easy to use resource for both aspiring technicians and those already in the automotive and diesel industries. This tool lets you explore real pay data with customizable searches by industry, shop type, location, and experience level. Check it out at wrenchway.com/pay or follow the link in the show notes. We also encourage current technicians to anonymously submit their own pay data to help make the tool even better for everyone. Lastly, thank you for your continued support as we work to promote and improve careers in automotive and diesel. We couldn't do it without you.
Yeah, so one of my favorite stories with that one, Jay, is our shop was a 28,000 square foot shop. We had a 20,000 square foot Napa store built into it, like on the side. And so we were viewed as a competitor by, the Auto Value or the Parts Plus type parts stores in town, even though obviously we always bought from them as well. But one of them brought one of their delivery trucks, late 90s Chevy S10 or early 2000s S10 that had 18 different fuel pumps installed in it over the past year plus. And like, I don't care what brand fuel pump you're putting in, they don't go bad.
Hate the fuel pump.
Right. And they're like, well, you're the guy, we got to bring it to you. And so I'm like, well, thanks, I'm honored. And I'll get a hold of you by the end of the day. And they're like, nah, just keep it. Well, to your point, doing a voltage drop test, there was a 8-volt drop to the chassis. So this fuel pump running on like maybe 6 volts, and just eating itself to death. And honestly, one of the keys was the guy that dropped it off said, sometimes we have to hit the parking brake to make the fuel pump run. And I'm like, that was my clue. Like, what would that do? Well, it's now grounding through that cable because there's no body ground or chassis ground. And so by doing that, quickly I found the negative battery cable going to the chassis, rot it off, clean it up, and solder a new end on it, put it on, test it, and hey, we've got B plus back at the fuel pump again. We're good. And so the store manager wasn't even back at the store, and we're calling him, all right, you can come pick up your truck. He's like, you're kidding me. And it's, explain it to him, and it's like, by it's a relatively basic concept, right? I mean, I'm not going to replace fuel pump unless I've got good powers and grounds there, and this is part of it. So by doing a relatively elementary test, which way too many people overlook, that's part of it. And so,
yeah,
I never went to school for auto repair, so I missed some of those electronics classes and had to your point, do a little more research and find some of those books back at the library. We didn't have YouTube, we didn't have Amazon at that point, so it took a little bit of additional effort, but it certainly paid off. And I remind my own kids of that now. Of like, my chemistry teacher tried to teach me about carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, NOx, hydrocarbons, all this stuff that I didn't pay attention to. And so now 20 years later, I'm trying to retrain myself on this stuff and go, man, you're an idiot. Why do you always take the hard way? And I do that, and my kids seem to be following that same path of, I'm the dumbest guy they've ever met. So what would I?
Well, I think that struggle at times is really where you do learn. And I will say some of the less than friendly older techs that I had grown up with were kind of telling me that, but that maybe their style of telling me that wasn't the greatest. It was more, they would always kind of say, well, yeah, I had to learn the hard way. You need to do the same thing. And I think if maybe they just changed the way they said that, and it would make such an impact on young techs, because at
Thank
some
you.
level
You
you
say that
do
again
have to
and
go
say it
through that.
louder, because
Yeah.
there's that tribal knowledge and guys going, I had to find out the hard way. You should too. No, let's not give a silver bullet per se, but let's explain the theory and walk the young technician through it, and let's make them proficient on year 2 of their career. I say very often there's technicians in this industry that are in their 10th year, but they're repeating year 1 9 times over at this point.
I hadn't heard that. That makes a lot of sense.
So let's band together. Let's share that information. Let's enable the next generation of people, because then they're going to be on there like, I learned from this guy that I worked with, and he really made a positive influence in my career. Not I had to learn the hard way. You should too. And
You say that, and I still point to my mentors. I have one of mine. His business card is on a frame here, and
awesome.
just people that meant a lot to me growing up. And I think, for that tech that's listening, that's in a shop right now, like there's so much value in how you treat somebody and how you treat somebody working next to you. And I totally understand that sometimes in the flat rate environment you're in, or if you're, you feel those pressures to produce, like sometimes it helps just to take a breath and try to help somebody else for a little bit. And I think you can have such a big positive influence on other people if you just take a step back and if you show them a quicker way of doing something, or hey, somebody's getting their butt kicked by, we're in the north, a rusty bolt that broke off, and now they're way behind, maybe go offer a helping hand with it. It means the world to that young technician that's out there.
Exactly. Yeah, I'll never forget I couldn't get the drain plug out of a rear differential, and the older guy that shows me how to heat it up, like, well, isn't that going to make it tighter? And then he's like, nope, you take a water bottle and you hit it with cold water and you shrink it, and that thing came out by finger at that point, and it's those type of lessons that you don't learn in a textbook.
No, you don't. And I think there's going back to the example you had of using voltage drop to figure something out. I think where a lot of technicians could learn there, even experienced technicians, is in a lot of cases we're trying to get to that troubleshooting tree as fast as possible and really have something tell us what to do. Whereas if you just take a second and think through a problem, and it feels like, I know early in my career, if I wasn't moving 1,000,000 miles a minute, I was worried I was going to get in trouble, right? Like by my boss. And so, I do see this more with younger technicians now, where they might sit down and, they're writing some stuff down, getting it out of their head, or maybe they are going through a schematic and being able to understand something. And for me as a young technician, I would have been terrified to do that. And now they are getting a little bit more of that understanding of okay, I do, give me a second to sit down here and just kind of be able to map out what I'm thinking and get it out of my head. And I think that's what the true professional techs are able to do, maybe better than anybody else.
My guys, when I was still in the shop, gave me a hard time all the time. Like, all you do is sit in front of the computer. I'm like, call it lazy, call it smart, whatever, but I'm not moving until I have a game plan, right? And so I need to understand how the system works, what affects it, why that code's set. So I'm getting off my stool and walking to the car with a clear game plan of what I need to look at. If this, then that. If this, then that. And where I'm going to go with it, and pinpoint it. But you guys are just ripping and pulling and tearing stuff apart and hoping you stumble across it. That does nobody any good with that. And so it's just think through it. I'm kind of a list guy as well, so I'm looking at what's we teach that very frequently in our classes, like differential diagnosis. Let's look at the data here. The engine's lean on one bank and not lean on the other bank. Well, we've got one mass airflow that's common to both banks. It's probably not going to be the mass airflow. We got one fuel pump. It's going to be common to both banks, right? So now we're looking at a vacuum leak or an injector, or what's affecting this, so, again, I'm checking off components. It's not that, it's not that, it's not that. And I'm left with, kind of like on an ASE question. Two of these are definitely not the answer. Now I'm 50-50. And so now I need to hone in on those areas.
That was such great advice right there. I hope that needs to be a clip on how to approach things, just because it is so true. And that's not, I mean, you take that principle to any aspect of your life, and maybe sit back and, have a game plan, and be thoughtful on how you're going to attack something. I think there's the common theme of like, go slow to go fast, right? Or
Yep.
like talking through that. And
Yep.
that just helps organize your thoughts. You're not in that chaotic mode in your brain where everything feels unorganized and just a mess.
Yep.
Like, if you can just take a few minutes, and even if it does take more than a few minutes, like, you've got a plan ironed out. And I understand it, there's pressures on a tech to produce. And so if
Yep.
that perception is you're sitting down, but like, don't worry about that. Worry about how you're going to solve these problems, and thinking through that is, in my opinion, probably always the best way to go about
Right.
it.
Well, it's probably like your race car days. You had to learn how to make a fast lap, and it's not just foot to the floor, take the inside of the track. You're systematically attacking it differently, and so your qualifying lap is different than your race lap, right? And yeah, it's like you said, sometimes you got to go slow to go fast.
This is good. One thing I've got to pull out of there is, you had mentioned ASE, and
Yep.
you and I both have a pretty big passion for ASE and all the
Yeah.
great things they're doing, and kind of even the recent years. I feel like the evolution in general. You're an ASE board member, and this is something where it's not new to you that you love ASE. This has been something that's been a part of your life for a long time. We hear at times the negative side of it.
Yeah.
Well, just because they can pass a test doesn't mean that they can work on a car.
Right.
And goes back to that kind of negative mindset that I was talking about earlier from a lot of folks, that there's this fight against it for whatever reason by some folks. But then when you look at what that represents, and why, in my opinion, we need ASE to be strong in our industry, I truly feel that we have to have some level of professionalism to justify where the labor rates are going on this
Yep.
stuff. And the labor
Yep.
rates have to go that way, just like we talked about before, because we need different levels of professionals on these
Yep.
things. And so, talk to me a little bit about your feelings there, and maybe the need for it, and maybe the way people should be looking at that
Yeah.
certification in general.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. Over the last 10 years seemed to be just because you pass the test doesn't mean you can fix a ham sandwich, right? And even I felt that in the shop when I became a master tech, passed the automatic transmission test, and the transmission guy that worked in the two bays next to me could not pass it to save his life. And he's like, "You don't even know what check ball goes in this cat." I'm like, "I don't, but I can read. I can understand. I'm not memorizing this stuff." And so, um, one reason I'm very passionate about ASE is it's industry regulating industry. And so it's kind of that, if not us, then who? I don't think any of us want the government to come in and start regulating this stuff and creating certifications themselves. It's going to be 100 times worse than what we have today. And so, my history with ASE is, as a young technician, as I talked about earlier, the other guys in the shop had it and I didn't. And so that was something to strive for, to, shut up, guys. I can do this. Or I viewed them as some of my heroes, per se, and respect, I guess. Right. And so,
Absolutely.
give me something to strive for. And so then once I got it, and I still say this today, walk in on Fridays, we'd all go to the local cafe diner, and have lunch together. And there'd be 8 to 10 of us sitting around a table. I've got the master badges and L1 on my shoulder, and 4 or 5 other guys have no certifications. Who do you think Joe Blow in the diner is going to come up and ask a question to. They're going to see the guy with the certifications and the well-decorated technician. And so that's who gets that attention, if you will. You know, driving through back roads. Even yesterday, I was driving across town in Grand Rapids, and there's a new shop, and they've got a big "We employ ASE certified professionals here." So whether that shop believes it or not, they're trying to gain credibility by hanging the ASE logo out front. And so ASE, admittedly, has probably not done the best job of advertising to consumers over the past decade, but recognizing so. Um, so back to starting as a technician, become a master certified, I got involved as a subject matter expert. I've got a ton of different plaques on my counter behind me here of all the different workshops I've been involved with as a SME in back to networking. Made a lot of great friends, met a lot of great people, and came up with a true appreciation for how the ASE exams are assembled by industry peers. There's a Honda guy there that's going, my technicians don't use mass airflow sensors. So, and then and the Chrysler guys are like, yeah, mine either. But everybody else says, well, it's part of the vehicles. And so they need to understand, and we need to test on that. But just great representation of OE manufacturers, aftermarket technicians, tool specialists, educators, etc., and coming together to write and validate all the questions. So it's truly a exam written by your peers, and putting that together, understanding that process, appreciating that process, and understanding now how other industries are emulating what ASE does for their own industries. And then having the chance to serve on the board. I started as a board of governors a couple years ago, and then moved to the board of directors, kind of the inner circle, if you will, last year and this year. And just so appreciative of the people that are involved with that. Again, the mix of OE representation there, aftermarket people. We just had our board meeting last week in Savannah in the closed door session. It was just, we all left like, man, I'm so glad that this person's here for that. This person's here for that. Just the mix of the different people in the room. And we're all here for one thing, and it's to raise the standards and the respect level of the repair industry, whether it's dealership levels or aftermarket.
That's as well summarized as I could ask for. That was really, really good. And you can tell it's from the heart. And I just echo everything that you're saying there in terms of seeing all the people in a room that do truly care about the industry, and from all walks of life, wanting to see the industry in a better place. I think there's a lot of value in that. And so hopefully that continues to grow. I think you're seeing maybe a change in attitude regarding ASE, I think, as a whole. And you'll still have your detractors, but I don't care what it is that you're doing, you're going to have detractors. And so I think it's gaining a lot more steam, and it's, just to your point, like, you really you don't want the government being the ones dictating right. how successful somebody is. We've seen how they work, and it doesn't go well. So
I get shut down.
Yeah, right.
but no, I think Dave has been a breath of fresh air. He comes in as a technician, a farm boy, a Ford employee with global implications, and coming in with new relationships, new ideas. People like yourself as industry allies, Chris from Endeavor, Jim from Babcock's. We're all working to make ASE cool again. That was a charge from our outgoing chairman, Jason Rainey. But again, it was awesome. After the meeting, we're sitting at the airport, all ready to fly home, and just a conversation between Jason Rainey with Napa Auto Care and Brad Marshall from Bridgestone and Luis from Subaru. And we're just sitting there magnifying about the quality of people there, but also kind of the weight that we bear with this, and understand that people respect this, and people, it's a big deal. We got to honor 56 industry professionals last week. and
So
give them
cool.
kudos for their stuff. And, these are people that this is a major lifetime achievement. They're stopping us at the airport too. Oh, it's so cool to meet you guys. And like, it's something we don't take lightly either. And so it's honor to represent the industry.
Well, you and I sat with a couple and their son at
Yeah.
dinner the first night, and it was so cool to just see it through their eyes, right? And
Yep.
see the experience through their eyes. And similar to what you said about SEMA, it was one of those moments where you do kind of pinch yourself and say, I can't believe I'm here, right? Like this is
Yeah.
really, really cool.
Yeah. To tell the 18-year-old version of me that this is where it'd be today, it's like, wow, that's cool. And so I have to remind myself of that on some days, like, you asked for this, pal. But
All right. Well, we've got some hard hitting questions here from our marketing team. Rapid fire. We should dim the lights and put the spotlight on right now.
Yeah.
But
I'm
no, just a few fun questions for you. The first one: if you weren't doing this job, what would you be doing?
Whew. When I sit back and daydream and look out the window, I think that guy that mows the grass on the side of the highway, that's a pretty good gig. He sees somewhere different every single day. He's not in the same thing. I don't think his stress level's that high.
No phone.
Right. He's listening to the radio. He pulls over and sits underneath the shade tree and eats his ham sandwich for lunch. I'm like, that's not a bad gig. So that might be it.
I might have that same dream some days. What was your first job?
So my first job was doing lawn care. I did lawn care, and that might lead into my career aspirations here yet. I did lawn care in middle school at our church, and then ran and eventually owned part of a lawn care company throughout my summers. And again, it was cool. You're somewhere different every hour, and you're outside and riding around on equipment. And so, that was a good job.
I think that for a kid teaches so much good work ethic, and so it teaches you so much about life. I feel like with lawn care and even how to properly maintain your equipment, right? And how to
every morning you do the maintenance, you replace the string on the trimmer, you fuel stuff up, get everything ready to go, and in the off season you do the maintenance. And so back to the previous question too, a farmer is one of the things I would probably be. Today, as I've moved up the pay scale, I can almost afford to be a farmer. Yeah, 40 acres of corn and some beef cattle. We raise steer here, show them with 4-H. My daughter's been more successful and married a dairy farmer, so we can afford this stuff now.
Isn't that funny? I think I'd be in the same boat there too. So I grew up showing cattle, beef cattle, and same thing with like the work ethic side, right? Like learning how to work on a calf and just seeing some of my buddies' kids showing now. So much goes into it, and I don't think people understand the time commitment. It was every single day when I was a kid working on a calf.
We bathe them, shampoo them, trim them,
blow dry them.
Yeah, my kids learned about spreadsheets because I was not that parent that just bought it all for them. So they had to understand what the input costs were, and then the profits and some of that kind of stuff. So great life lessons with shoveling manure.
Another similarity between us, I feel like. Last question: what time do you get up in the morning?
So this morning I was up at 5 after 5 Eastern time, and so this morning I joined a group of guys for Bible study. Older guys, a lot of life lessons I get from those guys, and almost like fatherly advice. And then breakfast with another friend, and then in my office by 7:30. I still have one kid at home that I need to drive to school on days when I'm home. I'm on the road a lot, but when I'm home, I get to bring him to school. So we're out the door by 7 o'clock on those days, and then back in the office. So,
that's cool.
Yeah,
that's cool.
I've transitioned from a night owl to the early bird here, and
that's not a bad thing.
I don't know.
You know what though? I think you probably start to value your time a little bit differently too, and how, like, rather than going and hanging out at a bar, like
Right.
if you can get up and have coffee with some people that can feed you some wisdom, like that's probably not a bad thing.
And the phone's not ringing yet. The emails aren't coming in. I do have a team in China, so there's some late night and early morning stuff with them, but just the peaceful time in the morning, sunrise, nothing better.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. Now, Ryan, where can people find you and everything you're doing? Really find out about what you're doing at Standard Motor Products.
So standardbrandtraining.com. They can look there. We always update our different classes. Follow us on LinkedIn, both Standard Brand SMP or myself, Ryan Kooiman, and Standard Brand as well. We've got YouTube videos. If you ever go, man, that guy, that guy's ugly, and I'm sick of listening to him. You can find me on YouTube on our Standard Brand or Four Seasons channels as well, sharing some more knowledge. So,
I would encourage everybody to do it. Ryan's doing some just insanely cool things in the industry. He has, over the course of his entire career, another example of somebody starting off as a technician and working their way up through. I love these stories because there's so many out there that have done this. And, I feel like we left a lot on the table in terms of stuff we should have been talking about or could have talked about, but it was such a fun conversation as always. And
part two,
hopefully,
that'll be part
hopefully
two, right?
we can convince you to come back on again.
I love it, Jay. Always a pleasure talking to you. We share a lot of the same passions, and we want to leave this thing better than what we found it, right? So
absolutely. Well, I appreciate that, and always looking forward to talking to you, and we'll do it again here sometime soon.
Thanks, Jay.
That wraps up another episode of Beyond the Wrench. If you liked this episode, please show your support by rating and following the podcast. You can also watch the video interviews on WrenchWay's YouTube channel. Speaking of WrenchWay, did you know Beyond the Wrench is managed and produced by the WrenchWay team? WrenchWay is an online community dedicated to promoting and improving automotive and diesel careers. We help technicians find the best shops to work at, and we also help auto, diesel, and CTE instructors get more support from local industry. You can learn more by visiting wrenchway.com.